The and if somebody wishes to be recognized, you need to raise your hand at the bottom of your screen. There's something called reactions. You click that, and then it should have a button for to raise your hand, and I'll recognize people in the order in which they have raised their hand. By way of introduction, the change that is coming is a very significant change. It's going to affect everybody on this call, and it's going to affect everybody in the racing industry in one way or the other. I received a notice that the document that I circulated, what was provided me by HISA, which was the second draft set of rules, which were not really in rule form, from the Racetrack Safety Committee, were circulated, but they've since been modified again. And I guess there's a slightly different version that's been posted on a HISA website that until yesterday I didn't even know existed, called hisaregs.org, hisausregs.org or something like that. That's now linked to their main website. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom DePasquale. I'm going to introduce Tom DePasquale, who has been retained by HISA to interact with state racing commissions. I know Dr. Sue Stover, who is the chair of the HISA Standing Committee on Racetrack Safety, is on the call, as is Ann McGovern, who is the HISA staff person who staffed the Racetrack Safety Committee. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'm sure people are going to have a lot of questions, and hopefully we can get some answers. The first thing I would ask you is that from the document that you had sent me, that we had analyzed and circulated to our members, if you could tell me what significant changes or that are notable that people should be aware of as we go into this discussion.
Yeah, I will address that, Ed, but first let me just thank everybody for participating in the call, and just ask, is there anyone else related to HISA that's on the call? I know Ann McGovern and Sue Stover are on the call. Anybody else call in?
John Roach is on the call.
All right, John, thank you. And John is counsel retained by HISA to work with us on this. So with that, let me take a minute to describe the process. Several of you we've spoken to before. Ed was kind enough to facilitate face-to-face Zoom meetings with, I think, about 35 state racing commissions to talk about conceptually and some of the major issues that were of concern to state racing commissions. We didn't have the benefit of published rules at the time. We do now. So where we are in the process is round one was proposed rules that came from the advisory committees and were circulated to about 30 constituent groups. We received written comments from a large number of groups, and those were taken under consideration by the advisory committees, who then reissued a draft 2 of the racetrack safety rules. And that rule is the one that has gone public on the HISA website. And any of you can access that, any member of the public can access that and submit written comments. And those will be especially helpful in the pre-publication stage before we bring these rules to the board for its consideration in early December, and then ultimately to the FTC for publication which should follow in the Federal Register, which should follow 2 to 3 weeks after FTC receives the rule. So you can expect that on the timetable we're on, these rules will be published by FTC in mid to late December, and there'll be a 60-day notice and comment period. And most of you as regulators are familiar with how that works. In terms of the discussion today, some of you are aware that the Federal Trade Commission published a process rule in late September that described with specificity what the requirements were for their approval of rules. And they reflect those requirements in the Administrative Procedure Act. And just briefly, it's incumbent on HISA to establish the reasons that we propose adopting a rule, the problem the rule is intended to address and how it does so, how it will affect covered persons, covered horses, and covered horse races. We are required to reference existing standards, guidelines, rules, model rules, et cetera, and any scientific data, analyses, or other factual underpinnings for the rules. So there is a burden on us as a regulator, the same as you when you promulgate rules, to establish the necessity of these rules, their reasonableness, and their connection to equine safety and welfare and racetrack safety. So to the extent that comments focus on those aspects of the rules, they will be most helpful, I think, to HISA going forward. I guess I would ask everyone, since there's a lot on the call, to keep your comments relatively brief so that everyone that wants to speak has an opportunity to do so, but also be mindful that you can go to the HISA website and submit written rules, and those written comments are especially helpful to us. For the most part, we're in listening mode. We want to hear your reaction to what's been put up on the website. And it's important to understand that state racing commission rules that are in place now that govern racetrack safety, the physical plants themselves, and other aspects of equine safety and welfare will remain in place unless they are supplanted by a specific rule of the authority. So preemption only occurs when HISA publishes a rule with respect to a particular thing, but those in the racetrack safety area will operate side by side with additional rules that are in place with state racing commissions now. So I guess the point is that these rules are not exclusive and all-encompassing, but when a rule gets passed at the federal level, it's the governing rule nationally. With respect to Ed's question about what's changed since the draft 2 that was circulated amongst racing commissions, basically what was stripped out of the rule are things that were duplicative or overlapping with what USADA is proposing in its protocol or other rules that will be governing the anti-doping and medication area. So to the extent there was overlap, we took the step of just taking some of that stuff out so it wasn't duplicative. It also has been reconfigured in a manner that provides incentives to state racing commissions to participate in the HISA program and addresses what happens if state racing commissions opt out of that program. So those are more administrative or operational aspects. The substance of the rules themselves and what must be of most concern to us now are the racetrack safety and equine safety rules, and those have not been changed in any material way. So with that as introduction, I'll if the people want to add anything more to that, then we'll follow a call of raising hands and listening to what you have to say about this.
Who wants to go first? Well, maybe I'll go first and kick it off. What struck me is about the document that was sent to us, that was distributed, was it's not rule language. Unlike our process, when our committees come forward goes to model rules and then goes to the board. It's actually written in rule language. What we have is an outline of a program. Setting aside the there are a number of things. Usually the way the federal government works is when the federal government wants a state, and let's be very clear about what state racing commissions are. State racing commissions are not part of the racing industry. They are not, despite what the federal law has been written on this, are not a racing constituency. They're independent state regulatory agencies who answer to the elected representatives, officials chosen by the people. So they work for the public. And they are structured in ways, just the way HISA has been structured, to be independent within their states. They are not conflicted out. They're subject to state ethics laws, state conflict of interest laws, public records laws, public meeting laws. So they are accountable to the public. What the program that was put forward says to me is there's a dramatic micromanagement of things that are currently being done by state racing commissions. And as I started to say, usually when the federal government wants a state racing commission to run a program consistent with the way they'd like to have it run, the federal government provides money. They provide grants. They pretty much say, okay, you're going to do this, but we're going to pay 50% or 40%. And you agree then to get that money, then you will do it this way. The problem with the HISA bill is the HISA bill did not include any federal funds to states to conduct their programs consistent with the way the federal government would like them to be conducted. So there's a lot of things in the document that came forward that HISA is not in a position to basically say to the state, you have to do this. So my initial reaction in looking at this, and you kind of micromanage things like weather-related instances and so forth. And there's some of the reaction I've gotten from people that if you really want to micromanage it, then why don't you just do it? Which means you would be in the position to have to hire personnel that I don't believe HISA is in the process of thinking about hiring. There are also requirements with regard to the additional hiring of veterinarians, which may or may not be something that a state can afford. That might be the onus might fall on HISA to do that. So this is a very tricky situation everybody has in front of them. I think the one thing that has come out of the state-by-state implementation calls, and that we have tried to do by doing these calls early before the rules came out, was to identify to HISA staff the limitations of what states can and might be able to do or might not be able to do. And certainly HISA is within its prerogative to design whatever program they want, just in the same way state racing commissions have been in the past. It did hit me that if the goal is to have a partnership with state racing commissions, the document that came forward, I think, created an incentive for states to pretty much wash their hands and hand it off to HISA. And I do know from subsequent conversations with various people that's certainly not the intent. The HISA is under extremely intense time pressure to get their program together and into the FTC, because the effective date, whether you like it or not, is July 1st next year. So I'll just say that, and then I think Duncan Patterson's got his hand up, and anybody wants to talk and be recognized, you can just go forward and do that.
Ed, I thought I might just respond to a couple of the things that you raised. It might be helpful to kind of get the perspective of kind of what in terms of the regulations and a few of those points. So if it's okay, I would love to do that. But if that messes you up, I'll stop.
No. This is everybody. If I've got something wrong, I'm just going by the piece of paper that I was sent.
Yeah. So let me just say a couple of things. The product that'll be on the safety side that will be produced to the Federal Trade Commission will be regulations. Quite frankly, we didn't think. We're under, as you noted, enormous time pressures. We believe that it's a far more efficient with the time frame we're looking at to kind of get things where they're going to be, and then we're going to format to regulations in terms of what's required in the Federal Register. As the person that's going to be primarily from not having a policy role, but from a drafting standpoint, that's going to work with Ann, Dr. Stover, and the committee to get this across the finish line, I just want to reiterate a couple of things. From my perspective, and I was the former vice chairman of the Kentucky Racing Commission. I worked with Mark Guilfoyle, I think the world of racing commissions. But I want everybody on this call to know that I've approached my job with the understanding that there might have been things I didn't like in this law, but this is the law I got to deal with. This is what Congress passed, and they set this time frame up for us, and I got to follow it. And so that's the path we're following. You will note in the new draft that went out yesterday, which is separate than the draft that was circulated, it explicitly throughout the document talks about the state racing commissions entering into voluntary agreements. HISA is not going to make a state racing commission do anything. I would point out that I think that when all the dust settles, it's going to be the best thing for the commissions, HISA, and horse racing for us all to work together. Because at the end of the day, we want the things that are working well on the ground to keep going. And when you read the regulatory vet provision, the new vet provision, we're hopeful. We're hopeful that the state racing commission's got somebody already there that can partner with us and do that job. The new reg makes clear if you don't, what happens in terms of how all that's going to come down. But I think you'll find that the new document, and I know that the committee and Dr. Stover and Ann want to hear from any of your concerns in this category of micromanagement, but I think you'll find the new document is very focused on cooperation and working together. I can assure all of you that every person, I've grown up around the racetrack, betting on horses and then getting on the other side. There's nothing I love more than horse racing. I can assure you that everybody on these committees and this board and this staff is committed to do right by our game. And we have been placed in a very tough time schedule. And Ed, I hear you, but I don't think I can go change what Congress has done.
Nobody's asking it to Johnny. I mean,
and
I heard, and I just want to, we've got people wanting to ask questions.
Well, and I just want to say this final thing. Any issue you have, make a comment, reach out to Ann. You can reach out to me, offer us proposed language. This committee will listen to you. And we are committed to working with everybody to do the best we can under this law. And
John, we are committed to working to make a smooth transition as much as possible. I will say this. We had asked for the ability to have observers at the committee to be a resource to the various committees. To also be an early warning system to identify issues that could be problematic early in the process, but now you're under the gun to get rules in front of the FTC. We were denied that ability to do that for reasons I do not understand. Regulators from different jurisdictions usually are invited at the request of a regulatory agency, which HISA is, to assist them if they have a certain area of expertise that or We could have been an early warning system for you on some things. I think the people on the committees are excellent choices. I think they're excellent people, but you know, the challenge for everybody is the workability of this. So with that, no further ado, let's go to people with their hands up. Lou Trombetta in Florida, you're first. Oh, I'm sorry,
thanks, Ed.
Duncan Patterson was first, Lou, I'm sorry.
You got it. No worries.
Thank you, Ed. I have to leave the meeting, unfortunately, but I was initially very in favor of HISA, and I'm actually very pleased and actually honored that I was selected to be one of the people to review the initial drafts. As I got into the drafts, I got more concerned about the direction this was going. And Tom, I shared with you in the last meeting that we had last week that there was overkill in certain areas, which you agreed to. And that's kind of unfortunately throughout those initial drafts, whereby things that needed to be done could be done, but they were overdone. And certainly the veterinarians is a classic example. It's not a question of paying for veterinarians, it's a question of where you're going to find the veterinarians. I mean, that's a real concern. Quickly on two very specific questions that I meant to ask last time, and I'll be very quick with them. You have a avoided claim rule. If there's an appeal of avoided claim, where does that go? Can it go to our commission, our stewards to handle? Or does it have to go to FTC, which will be a protracted process? The other thing is whip rules. If the jockey violates the whip rule and there's an appeal, where does that go? I mean, we've recently dealt with those things and they were expediently handled by our stewards and then the commission. But if they have to go to the FTC for further review, I mean, that's a bureaucratic nightmare. So, Tom, could you respond to both those questions, please?
Yeah, Duncan, taking the last one first. The statute calls for, as part of the racetrack safety program, to spell out procedures for charging and adjudicating violations, for a schedule for civil sanctions, and the disciplinary hearing process. And that is a rule that's being handled separately from the advisory committee. We have counsel preparing that rule, and that will be available shortly. But I think you can anticipate that those types of violations will be handled at the state level by stewards.
Hey, Tom, I think that's a perfect example to the Florida question. The new rule makes what we put out yesterday makes where it is right now, subject to further comment, is if the state enters into the agreement with HISA, your stewards will handle the two issues that were just raised. There's no, the rule that we circulated yesterday makes clear that if the state enters into the voluntary agreement with HISA, the stewards will handle that type of discipline. There is some question of, I guess right now you would take a steward's decision and take it up to the racing commission and to a state court. We're still working out where that would go. It might have to kind of go up, but if the state wants to work with HISA, your stewards will be making that decision, just like they do today, under any specific rules that HISA has promulgated. But if we've not hit the area, you get to do whatever you're doing in those other areas. But then your stewards would enforce, say, HISA's voided claim rule.
Well, one quick comment, then I'll get off. You kept using the word voluntary, but my understanding, if the states do not conform with the HISA regulations, they lose their ability to simulcast. So what the hell is voluntary about it?
Oh, no, you don't. What I was trying to talk about was the stewards. So the state, you're not forced to have your stewards be a part of the HISA regulatory framework and enforcement. If you choose to do that, they will do what they're doing, and they will have to enforce the HISA rules in addition to whatever rules you have that aren't in that area. That's what I'm simply saying. Obviously, the participants in horse racing, regardless of whether the State Racing Commission enters into a voluntary agreement, will have to follow HISA's regulations because that's what Congress has said. This is a question of whether the state racing commissions want to work with us, use their personnel, and enter into cooperative agreements. But
so just to cut this conversation so we can get to the next questions, there's obviously going to be individual negotiations with individual states as to how this will work in those states. And there will need to be agreements probably with HISA, and there will need to be agreements probably with the enforcement agency. The degree to which a state, the decision as to the extent to which a state racing commission will be involved in this program will probably not be made by the state racing commission in many states because it will be a budget issue. It might be a legislative or a governor issue. So I think we've said that consistently over the months to senior leadership at HISA. This is a very tricky balance. There are state officials who are asking state racing commissions what's in it for us, and there's no money coming across the table to pay for the use of state officials to enforce this. Now, I don't shoot the messenger, John. This is just the reality of state government in some states, not all states, but some states. And there are states that have asked this question, and you'd be surprised at the names of the states. This is a very tricky thing. The intent of everybody of the HISA folks is to try to keep as much try to keep as much of the state infrastructure in place. But whether that happens or not, that's going to be that's going to be to be seen as this plays out. Lou Trombetta of Florida is next. Go ahead.
Hey, Ed, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to get everything working here. I guess just there's 60 people on this call, so I'm going to try to be somewhat short. I have one question and two sort of, I guess, just general feedback, if you will. I want to thank ARCI, for what you have been doing, Ed, and trying to get information passed on to the states. One of my biggest gripes with this is just the communication from HISA. I don't even know what draft to comment about at this point because I don't know what draft is the most recent one. So I think just a general kind of recommendation or a suggestion or request from HISA would be if there was some kind of email list or something. It's nice that you guys have the website. I just went to it during this meeting. It's definitely helpful. I'm going to go through that, but I haven't had time to review that compared to the documents we've got from ARCI. So if there's some way to just kind of make communication a little bit.
In fairness, HISA, we've circulated things on behalf of HISA. So when we get them and we can circulate them, we circulate them.
I understand that. I appreciate that. I'm asking HISA if there's any plan for them to have an email list or something. I feel like it'd be easier for them to say the draft version for whatever is out. This is the one we're talking about, so that when people have comments, it's clear what those comments are about. Two, question is really about the accreditation process for the racetrack safety program. In the draft regulations dated October 29, there's some kind of like preface language about the accreditation process and about the intent. I'd love it if there was a little bit more information about how that would work. I think for some states like Florida that are trying to figure out how to go forward and that want to try to work with HISA to make this program work, It's a little scary to not know how that accreditation process program will work. You know, we're, like Ed just said, there's some time restrictions and time constraints on the state where if we want vets or stewards or employees, I mean, we're going to have to hire people. And to do that, I have to get more money from the legislature, which takes time. It takes a long time to do that. It won't happen by July 1 of this year. So I don't know what type of time frame is being considered for accreditation or how that process will work. I know that there was a mention of like a kind of a going forward or working towards accreditation process. That was good to see, but can anybody on the phone provide a little bit more information about how that process will work or what's envisioned? And then third and finally, well, but actually just forget the third. If anybody can get to that second one, I'd appreciate it. And thank you for the time and thank you for appearing and being here.
Ann or Sue, do you want to take the accreditation question?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be here because we're very interested in your comments. We appreciate that accreditation is a concern and are currently working on it. The intent is to facilitate accreditation, to I'm not sure if this is the right term, but to grandfather accreditation to jurisdictions that, for example, have gone through an accreditation process and already satisfied accreditation, to provide provisional accreditation to almost all other jurisdictions, and to facilitate accreditation through whatever time frame those jurisdictions need, as long as they satisfy, as long as they're demonstrating process from time to time. So at the moment, we're working on what that process will be, but we would prefer that process not be punitive, but facilitate formative progress toward best practices. And do you have any other comments relative to that?
No, I also want to thank everybody for allowing us to be here today and really appreciate your input. This really is a collaborative effort, whether you guys can see that or not. We definitely have listened to the folks that we've asked for input, and we have heard your concerns through Ed. I would just, regarding the accreditation, as Sue said, we would like to structure this in a manner that is not punitive, and I can assure you that the committee wants to help those jurisdictions that may not meet initial accreditation to get there in a positive manner. Our hope is to develop programs that will allow you to do that, and we realize that the time it's going to take for some jurisdictions to meet some of the standards is not a short time frame. So we know that we want to work with you. We do have a very short time frame to get all of this done, and the regulations were the first place to start. Accreditation is next, and I would assume, Sue, we can have some kind of draft in the next 2 weeks on accreditation.
Dr. Connie McNabb from Texas.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Whenever anyone is planning in depth, especially a plan that is this expansive, no plan is any more valid than the validity of your assumptions. There's a lot of different areas, but particularly in the veterinary part, there is not a huge population of quality equine racing experienced veterinarians who are just chomping at the bit to come and participate in racing if they're not in it already. The depth of what you want, not that we don't have qualified veterinarians, but even though Texas racing has got some life breathed into it, we don't have year-round full-time racing that supports a depth of a staff. We've got a couple of great veterinarians that are the long poles in the tent. We have some contractors who are willing to come in. But the depth of what you are requiring, especially you want full laboratory postmortems, whole horse, the epidemiology, the depth of the reporting. What we're asking our veterinarians to do to deliver a quality and safe veterinary medical surveillance and have safe racing in Texas. I can't brag on my guys anymore, but the depth of what you want, and unless you're willing to come up with some grants that go to the vet schools, you say you don't want to have any field autopsies. Well, if you've taken a look at the size of Texas, even just the 3 big cities where we have racing, check the little scale down at the bottom of the map. And now you're either having to haul dead horses hundreds and hundreds of miles. Who are you billing on that? Or how are you going to get this done and who's going to do it? Again, we don't have 5 or 6 days of racing a week year round like some states. So, the veterinary talent that we have, the in-depth that you want, it all gets down to where's the money. If indeed you're going to make a run at vet schools, or you're going to expect to have equine medical directors on a regional basis. The vet schools have got a lot of capability. They have a lot of facilities, but the first thing they're going to say is show me the money. They certainly know how to deal with federal grants or state money. But right now, the state budget for the Racing Commission is like this, and as others have said, trying to get more money, that's a legislative piece. So we can't even start that conversation for another year and a half. But for the level of scientific, and I'm not saying that it's a bad idea, it's a great idea, but it's in a world that funds are unlimited. So if indeed these are going to be mandated requirements, you're beating me over the head with something that, I can't do. At this point, I can't do. So, either where's the money, or where's the organization, or are you going to tap into the people who actually have the facilities? Do the facilities exist in Texas? Sure. College Station has got a bunch of them. But again, they're going to say, where's the money? They do stuff for us. They do our drug testing here and there. The pathology lab has shown us a certain amount of generosity, but to do the kind of level that you're mandating, that is a big bill. And you say, well, we're just going to bill the owners. Take a look, what passes the common sense test? And I would say that you're making assumptions and you haven't really validated your assumptions on where are those resources and where are those people who have the skills to do what you are mandating us to do. Do I think it's a bad idea? No, but how we get there, another story.
Doug Moore from Washington.
Yeah, I want to echo Connie's thoughts as well. Kind of an observation, and I'm going to circle back to something that Duncan had said earlier about penalties. The makeup of the board and our willingness to try to participate, I don't see where any of our smaller jurisdictions were taken into account. Most of you're looking at places that are running 200 days a year. We run 50. We're not going to have the staff. We're not going to have the funding. We're not going to have the ability for all these committees and mandates that are happening. The small jurisdictions have been forgotten in this process, I do believe. Now, as far back when Duncan was talking about the stewards dealing with things, I want to circle back to my colleagues on here know this is kind of one of my pet peeves, is the penalty structure. You have in there a jockey uses a whip one extra time, he gets a 3-day suspension. NYRA runs 201 days a year. You give a jockey there a 3-day suspension, that's about 1.5% of his potential earnings. We run 49 days. You give the same penalty here, you're taking over 6% of their potential earnings. That is not an equitable penalty. You're taking the steward's ability to look at purse size, race meet length, those type of things that they're trained to do and make the appropriate penalty. You're mandating things, thinking it's fair, and it is not fair.
Joe Lucas, Oklahoma.
Yeah, first off, I really hate commenting on something that I really don't know if it's what's there, finding out that there's a new set of things we're talking about today that was posted yesterday. So it may not apply, but there isn't enough hours in the day to tell you how many issues I have with this, but in complaints, and a lot of them have been addressed here with these latest comments that have come up. But going to your penalties, what are the penalties for violating some of these other requirements or mandates that you have? You talk about a trainer being set down for 5 days, and whatever the deal is for not reporting. For veterinarians on this, what is the penalty for some of these other mandates? When are we going to see those? What is going to be the penalty for these racetracks that don't comply to these things? When are we going to see those?
Joe, I'll take that. The statute spells out the penalties for violations, or the range of penalties. It prescribes civil sanctions, fines, injunctions, and there's a range of other remedies that HISA and USADA have under the statute. We are working on developing a rule that would be more specific about sanctions and tie them to specific types of violations. For example, the one you raised, what do we do if a racetrack doesn't comply with its obligations?
Yeah, I haven't seen that in any of this, Tom.
Yeah, well, the statute spells out the remedies that we have, but we want to make them more specific because the statute also requires that we spell out a schedule of penalties. And so we're working on the schedule.
And my question is, when are you going to do that? When are we going to see it?
Well, it's being worked on right now.
Well, a lot of stuff y'all are working on, I hope, because there's a lot ain't done.
Yeah.
But I'm just asking, is there no time? Is there, you guys have asked for all these extensions with the FTC to get your job done. Are we, the racetracks, the racing commissions, the horse industry, are we going to be extended that same time period y'all were? Or are we just supposed to bite it and go on and have it done no matter what? July 1.
No, I think well, go ahead.
Joe, I would just say that it's probably not a fair character. It's probably what's been conveyed to you, but that I would tell you that we basically got a letter from the FTC with about 5 days notice. Their expectation was that we were gonna have to get an extension because to meet, but as long as we were getting it to them in December, they were going to be able to post and comment. The one thing I would tell you is, even if you disagree with everything we're doing, the volunteers, the people that are getting paid have been working around the clock, and Congress gave us this schedule, and it's tough, but we are literally doing the very best we can to get this stuff out. But I think it's fair for you to criticize us on a lot of things, but seeking this standard waiver from the FTC was just not really it was really kind of a nothing burger.
I think the operative question is if are you going to be willing to grant extensions to states?
I think the answer was my question. Yeah, I want to answer that question, Joe, because I think we're focusing an awful lot on things that are imposed on racing commissions. But if you go through the rule, and I was comparing what's in the rule today to what's in model rules or the Minnesota rules that I'm most familiar with, and just looking at the list, whether it's a safety and welfare committee or necropsy and paddock safety protocols, equine ambulance minimum requirements, racetrack monitoring and surface maintenance, emergency preparedness plan, infectious disease management plan, accident reporting system, and things of that sort. Many of those things are already in place at our racetracks, and many of them are reflected in rule. And to the comment about micromanaging, I mean, we've got rules in Minnesota that prescribe the height of gates in at the perimeter of a racetrack. So a lot of this stuff is in place, and what we're trying to do with those obligations or minimum requirements that are imposed on racetracks is to make them more uniform. Now, the comment that Doug made that we've got to take into account regional differences and track size and things of that sort, I can tell you that is under serious consideration as to how to structure this in such a way that it's uniform in the sense that it meets minimum safety requirements, but is also cognizant of the fact that different states, tracks, purse sizes, and things of that sort have different capabilities. So again, put it in, submitting those comments in writing has an impact, and we're aware of that issue and trying to decide how to address those concerns.
So I'm going to make a quick comment. One of the options for a state racing commission, if you find that you don't have the ability to do certain things yourself, and it's been discussed by some people to me, is you could turn the requirement as a requirement on the racetrack as a condition of license. So in terms of the regulatory vets and so forth, they would move off the state racing commission payroll either to the HISA payroll or the racetrack payroll. And that, I don't know if HISA's looked at the possibility of any of that, but that's an option for states. And don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you the way state budget people approach these type of issues.
Hey, Ed,
Bob,
I think you'll be pleased with the new draft. And the reason I wanted to interject is if any of the folks on this call have other ideas, I would love to hear them. But the new draft specifically says that if the state racing commission doesn't enter into an agreement, say for a regulatory vet, that HISA will hire them and the racetracks have to pay for it. So exactly what you just articulated, and I don't even think you've had the benefit of reading it yet.
No, I haven't.
But what you've articulated, what I've done and what Dr. Stover's done and the committee's done is we went back and put this new draft together. We really tried to focus on, okay, what happens if the state can't do this, even if they want to, from a money standpoint? What's the process going forward? And I think you'll see whether it's on stewards, the regulatory vet, even the stuff about the emergency weather plan. It goes through and says, look, if the state's not doing this, here's how we're going to do it. So I think you've hit the nail right on the head, Ed. But the reason I wanted to interject is we would love to hear from you all any ideas you have about ways to creatively do this for, say, a state. And we want every state to cooperate in an agreement in terms of how to practically bring this about. So Ed, what you've raised is exactly where we've gone.
That's great to hear, John, and that's why I asked Tom right from the get-go what were the major changes from the document we circulated to the document you've now put up on your website. But another thing is you may have the authority in certain areas. You may not need to put it all in your first round of rules. Your medication and doping stuff is I think the must-dos, and some of this stuff could go in, but not everything could go in. It may need further work, but and that was my initial conversation with Chairman Sheeler when I first met him early in the summer. Is you don't need to have the perfect set of rules on day one. This is an enormous transition that's required under this statute. And don't try to get perfect on day one. There's a lot of stuff that's working and it's working well, and you may not need to totally dismantle it. And you may want to rethink some of that because the big issue is going to be the cost. Let's go to Bob Lopez.
I got one more question.
Oh,
I got
I'm
one
sorry.
more question. It's about
Okay.
the other breeds. Tom, we started out in our HISA or Zoom meeting with you, and at that time it was we don't know if we're going to include the other breeds or not, or whether we'll be willing to. That has escalated now to where you guys are telling jurisdictions point blank, you will not accept the other breeds. Will you put that in writing and send me a letter telling us that here in Oklahoma? Because that's 50% of our population on races, but it's 90% on our violations of medication violations. I'd like to know that. Plus, our quarter horse industry needs to have some certainty on this if they can get it. I want that in writing from y'all if you'll do it.
Well, I think what Hank said is that HISA will not be ready on July 1st to regulate non-thoroughbred breeds. I don't think he said that you can't make an election. The statute affords any state and any horsepersons group the option to make an election.
Well, what good does it do to include them if you're not going to be ready to do it?
Well, in your election, I think the rule is going to have to define what the process is for a state to make an election. I anticipate that it would be on a form prescribed by the authority, so that the elections come in a uniform way. And the statute, importantly, Joe, requires the horsepersons group or the state that seeks to make an election to define how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to pay for the cost of regulating that breed.
I understand that.
Yeah. So
Joe, we're gonna have a regulation that everybody's gonna get to see, that's gonna walk through the process of the question you've asked.
Yeah.
And that regulation is not gonna say no. It's gonna set forth the process.
Mhm.
I would imagine, as a practical matter, what Hank said is right relative to July 1st. But we're going to have a regulatory process to walk through that election. The answer is not going to be no. It's just going to be, here's the
Not
regulations. Yeah. And it's just, again, the fire hose we've got pouring in on us. There's only so much that we can do. And so, but that you will get to see a regulation regarding the breed elections.
Well, I hear all these things I'm going to be seeing. This thing's on us, guys, and we weren't part of the cooks in the kitchen that developed this HISA. We weren't part of it. Fact is, we were prohibited from it. There wasn't any communication with us when this thing with the language was being developed in the bill that Congress passed. That was done by whoever. So we were not a part of that, but we're the ones having to deal with the logistics of what that monster created. And this is what we have to do as a racing commission for a horse industry in our state. And these people need to have a definition of what they are or are not going to be doing. And again, this isn't just a few races in Oklahoma. It's 50% of our races, and even more a population of the horse industry in Oklahoma. But on July 1, we're in the middle of a race meet that one part of the group is going to be under the old rule, I guess you'd call it, what I'd say the Oklahoma Horse Racing Commission, that's been status quo. And the other group that's in the test barn running the other half is going to be, and running under the same rules, is going to be running under a totally separate group. Yet they're going to be able to profit from those signals coming across there because of the share of the money. But the thoroughbreds are held to a different standard because of this, and expenses to be competitive. But I want to, I'd like to get, I mean, what do we do? If I know what, we are a non-appropriated state agency, okay? So you put this on us. And that means us is the membership, the members of this industry. We don't have a means to go to our legislature and get funding for this. We are a non-appropriated agency. Of course, I know nobody thought about that. Wasn't a big deal. That wasn't what their state was. So don't worry about it.
Hey, Joe, I would tell you on the issue you've raised on the July 1st in the test barn.
Yes.
This is going to frustrate you because I'm going to say stay tuned, but the precise issue you've highlighted, we're all over. And we are, I can tell you it's not on the safety side, but it's on the other side. The question you raise is a spot on question. And there are numerous of us trying to figure out a way to make that a lot better, more seamless issue. But that point you've raised is a totally legitimate and valid point that we need to figure out a way to address to avoid the problem you're focused on. And I can tell you at the highest levels, we're working on that.
So I'm gonna move this on. Frankly, John, I'm just going to reiterate this. I think if you had taken us up on our desire to be informally flies on the wall and resources to you as this was all being developed, rather than keeping us out of the picture, we would have avoided a lot of this today. Let's go to Robert Lopez in Washington.
Thanks, Ed. I want to thank you again, Tom, for allowing this process and allowing us to have a chance to speak our mind. But I want to reiterate a comment that I made at the last Zoom meeting a couple of days ago on the implementation. I think it's critically important that we see these draft service agreements that we keep referring to probably much sooner than later. And as the current chair of the ARCI, I'm asking, will you be willing to allow John to work with our regulatory attorneys committee in trying to work through some of these issues early on?
Bob, I'm gonna be responsible for that. John's got his hands full drafting these regs, et cetera. And I was contacted by, is it Mr. Bonin from Louisiana during our session, who volunteered to participate as with me to begin noodling these service agreements and working on them. And my thinking is that we get a group of 4 or 5 state commission lawyers who are willing to dedicate some of their time, and we begin to work on this. So the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. I would propose this is that HISA provide us with a draft, and then we can put it in front of a group of the regulatory attorneys, and then about things that are missing. Tom, I think if you were to generate a document, we could start that process. Now that we're seeing as the rules are being developed, I think that could start immediately after the HISA board decides what the actual proposed rules going to the FTC are. But I think a document needs to come over from HISA that will that we then can work with and get to. Bob, anything else?
No, that's all I want to do. Thank you.
Okay. Tom Sage, you need to unmute. Okay.
Yep. Thank you. I have a couple of questions, and it's from comments that have come up earlier in the conversation. First of all, there was talk if the state commissions did not sign the service agreement, then what are we going to do? We're going to have 2 sets of stewards in the stand. We're going to have stewards from the authority that's doing enforcing the authority rules, and a set that are enforcing the state rules. I don't know. Maybe that's going to be addressed in the rules that I've not seen that just got posted, I guess. The second question would be, when we talk about accreditation and accreditation for the safety standards, who's doing that accreditation and who's paying for it? And thank you. Anybody?
Sue or Ann, you want to take that?
Or I would just have to say that at the moment, all of those things, the things that you mentioned are being considered. We would hope that we could engage existing resources within the industry to assist with accreditation, and we're currently working on it.
So
and Joe, I see you shaking your head again. I understand your frustration, but we have to get the rules first, then accreditation. I mean, there's only so much you can do in the amount of time we've been given. So accreditation is definitely on the list. It's it's the committee's next target, and we'll get it out to you as soon as we can.
And do you have
that's my whole point. Somebody should have thought about this before they put this rule on there. And that is very well my point. Well, we're the ones, the racing commissions on the ground, the boots on the ground people are the one that's going to have to be jumping through hoops because of all this. We're working on that.
And we'll be jumping
these deadlines, we didn't set those deadlines. We had nothing to do with when this thing is implemented.
Joe,
okay,
I understand your frustration, but it's my time right now. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, she's the one brought me up.
I get
the one
it.
brought me up.
You got it. And do you have any idea of what you're thinking for an accreditation body, or has there been any thought put into that? I know you said it's coming, but surely there's been some thoughts.
Well, as Sue said, the committee's looking at current accreditation processes and is in the process of developing them, or developing their own. So no, I don't think I can answer that question.
Okay,
Right
so if a track is NTRA accredited right now, does that mean they're going to be accredited for what you're talking about, or are they going to have to go through another whole accreditation?
As soon as the accreditation process, excuse me.
The committee is currently working on this. I hesitate to give one answer or another.
Yeah.
But one of the possibilities is that any racetrack that is currently accredited by the NTRA will be accredited. All other racetracks may be provisionally accredited. And again, we look for this to be a formative procedure, trying to avoid punitive measures, but encouraging and facilitating over whatever period of time that might differ for different jurisdictions, to enhance safety and enhance their process. And the accreditation procedure is there to constructively observe the current state, and to say, we can help you. We would like to help facilitate you coming up to another level. And we've observed these things in other jurisdictions. And have you thought about this? So yes, it's not well outlined yet because we're working on it. And those are the principles by which we're working.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably in a very unique situation. I have the potential of 6 or 7 new racetracks in the next 18 months to 2 years. They are going nuts because they don't know what to follow right now. What's going to be the time frame?
You might tell them to go quarter horse.
All right, thank you.
Charlie Moore, Wyoming.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you everyone from HISA for being on the call. I echo Doug Moore's comments and concerns. I echo Tom Sage's comments and concerns, and also as well Joe Lucas and everybody. As I think I said the other day on the call, on one of our calls, basically we have one option here, and the option is to not send our signal out of state and then not be affected by this at this point. It's the least impactful to our horsemen, to the state of Wyoming, in that. So with that being said, and we can't unring the bell, we all wanted to be a part of this initially. And I think we still want to be a part of this, but I would reach out again one more time, because I did submit requests initially to have some sort of representation from a small jurisdiction. It's a concern. One thing I do find sometimes the West has a little different approach to things, maybe a little more logical at times on approaching different things. But at the end of the day, I would volunteer my time to assist in this process and represent my other colleagues in the smaller jurisdictions. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Charlie. I was going to say, the theme that's run through all of these conversations is cost and impact. I guess I would request those who have a creative way to tier the obligations imposed, particularly on racetracks of various sizes or means, to make suggestions in writing to us as to how that might be done. We all certainly want to make sure that minimal standards for safety are met, that all the elements of a safety program as prescribed by Congress are part of the plan. But there may be creative thinking that could be brought to bear on the question of how to accommodate those of lesser means, of lower purse structures, of fewer race days, and things of that sort. So that's where people's thinking can be especially helpful as we go forward.
Well, the only thing I'll say to that, Tom, is that's why we wanted to have observers in these committees from the get-go to be a resource to you, and we could plug people in, but that decision was a no. And now we're in the 11th hour, and now you need new ideas.
Let me respond to that.
And we've offered that.
I don't want to kill any time on that discussion, Tom.
No,
It is
you are-
what it is. And the
Ed,
lack
you've
of
already-
transparency here will probably be something that needs to be revisited. Can I ask a question? When is HISA going to release its bylaws and its own operational rules, proposed rules? Are they coming at some point? I would suppose you're under the same deadline to get them in front of the FTC.
The rules for regulations that don't relate to racetrack safety and to most of the drug protocols are not under the 120 day deadline. They're under a different deadline. So I think those will be put out. At least they have to be finalized by some point in January as it relates to the operational rules.
Okay. They would be adopted by the FTC or have public comment on those as well?
Yes, and I think I can't imagine we wouldn't follow some of the same. I can't imagine that we would not follow. Even before got to the FTC, that we wouldn't seek input and distribute them.
John, when you filed for your nonprofit filing, were you not required to submit those at that time, or am I mistaken? When you filed to be a nonprofit, did you not supposed to have filed your bylaws then?
I don't understand the question.
I thought that was a requirement on nonprofits. Period. Forget.
Probably depends on the state, Joe.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's my question.
Hey, let's go to Lou back on the rules. I'm sorry, Joe.
Sorry.
Thanks, Ed. And I just have a very fast follow-up regarding the penalty discussion. Tom, can you just clarify? It sounded like, should we be expecting rules on penalties, or is the take that the penalties are provided in the bill? I wasn't completely clear in one of the comments there, because my interpretation of the bill is that civil citations will be promulgated in rule. And it sounded like you might have had a different take on that. I just wanted for clarity.
No, you're right, Joe. Generically speaking, the statute sets out the types of penalties that can be imposed by HISA and the agency. But I think the racetrack safety rules require, as one of its elements, that there be a schedule of civil sanctions for violations. So it's the schedule and the disciplinary process, the question that was raised previously, which will be the subject of an operational rule, if you will.
Well, okay, sorry. When you say operational, the rule will be filed with FTC though, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Lou, you'll get a chance to see that, before we file it.
Thanks, John. And John, you've mentioned several times about reaching out to you. How would we do that? What's the best way to do that?
You can, my email address is John, JOHN, @rrrfirm.com. If you've missed it with my unique last name, if you just put John Roach, Kentucky lawyer,
Gotcha.
You'll hit it as well.
Why don't we do this, Tom? If you could send us a piece of paper with a contact of appropriate HISA personnel, staff people for the committees, yourself, Hank, legal, where to file comments on anything, that would be helpful, and we'll circulate that to all the commissions. I'm starting to get some requests for that, and a contact sheet should have a name, a phone number plus an email would be helpful, and obviously a title or some type of what their function is.
Thank you.
Doug Moore.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with Tom's comment on a creative way to fund this, either the racing commissions or the tracks themselves. I don't think there is a creative way if the money's not there. We can't grow money we don't have as an industry. And I will say, may not be a popular thing to say, is there's a strong feeling amongst our stakeholders, along with some other jurisdictions I know are in the same boat, that have a feeling that the driving force behind this legislation could care less if our small jurisdictions go away. That may be part of the reason for this. So I think you need to take into account that if we go away, there's no wagering in Washington. You're not going to be able to send your signal in. We're not sending out. There's no ADW wagering. You lose a tremendous amount of handle. But as far as you talk about funding, we cannot grow money on trees, whether it be the commission or the racetrack themselves.
No? Wish we could grow money on trees. DC seems to print some. Maybe we could get some of that. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? Things for the good of the order.
I was wondering if I could just make a comment.
Please.
And that is that we really appreciate comments and look forward to seeing them. Some of the things that you're responding to today, we made changes relative to comments that we received, and hearing that there's, another side of the story, other things to think about. I can't emphasize enough our willingness to listen, but we need to receive those comments. Otherwise, perhaps the comments we receive are not reflective of the broader industry. So thank you for letting me be here and listen, and please keep them coming.
And Sue, if I can add to that, the website is the home of the most recent drafts. And if you go to HISAUS.org, there's a big block there that says most recent regulations, draft regulations. Click on it, register, and you'll have access to the most recent drafts and an ability to comment that we look at every day. That is the easiest way to get your messages to us.
Maybe the people behind HISA could get Biden and then to put it in the infrastructure bill, guys, on the funding of this thing, huh?
The infrastructure bill passed. It's too late for that one.
Oh, I thought maybe we could get in on that second one, Tony.
Hey, Ed, Mark in Kentucky, I'd like to make a comment if I could.
Hey, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, guys, we're pretty resourceful people in racing. We've overcome a lot of adversity in our life, and with certain racetracks, certain breeds of horses and whatnot. And we all know the stuff that everybody's repeated and re-repeated. We all know those are the problems. But at the end of the day, this is passed. We got a July 1 deadline. Let's roll our sleeves up and let's make it work. I mean, we're all capable of it. I know 9/10 of the people on this phone call, and I know they're very resourceful people. And I just wanted to make that comment. I'm not saying something good for something or bad for something, but we got to make it work. So let's sit down and make this work. That's the only comment I wanted to say.
Thanks, Mark.
I think the $64,000 question is going to be when HISA comes forward with its rules as to how this is going to be paid for. Is there a timetable on that?
I guess I should answer that because I'm somewhat involved in that. We are working very hard on it. I would say that I don't know the timetable. We do have to, there are parts of what we're required to do on the funding side that are part of the regulatory process that will be due on the January deadline, not the December deadline. I would also say that I think it was the person that spoke from Washington, I think it was Doug, but the working ad hoc committee working on the funding, I don't think anybody's going to be happy with the it's more what it's going to cost. But I will say that I think that the smaller racing jurisdictions are going to be pleased looking at the financial burden relative to the overall burden. We are working very hard to look at the realities of the smaller jurisdictions, the number of races they have, the purses they're running for, and kind of thinking about that. It's none of it's going to be great because, you know, whenever you're dealing with money, it's hard. But I would hope, and I say this because I think that you might not like out the overall funding, but I'm very hopeful that the smaller racing jurisdictions are going to see that we've worked very hard and bent over backwards trying to come up with every creative way to offer them relief. And so as soon as that's finalized, you can imagine how complicated it is. You know, you all will get the opportunity, like everybody else, to get a chance to see it. But and again, I can't guarantee you're going to be happy. I can just tell you, I think you might see that we've worked very hard with an emphasis on the smaller jurisdictions.
Thank you, John. That helps a lot. I think just to reiterate before we go to Steve May, what Mark just said, I totally agree with Mark. This is the law. It's taking effect. We have to figure out how to make it work. If everybody's hearing a tenseness on this call, it's because people are frustrated because for the most part, the state regulators have been kept at an arm's length, and if we're to be your partners, you know, this is our problem too, and we've been kept out of even observing the discussions, let alone participating in them, but even observing the discussions going on in the committees, and it's certainly you're right. That's certainly you're right. But, you know, there's a lot of people who are new to the regulatory network. The regulatory network is a very close-knit network, as you know, John, but you were a commissioner, you weren't on the operational level, but I can't tell you how many times I get a call from an executive director saying, hey, we're having a work session on this topic. Can you participate? Or would you, if not you, is there somebody in the network who would be a resource to us? And we do that all the time. And these are private, non-public discussions. We're all trying to get the same thing done. But the state commissions have systematically been kept at arm's length on a lot of this stuff. And frankly, when we got a non-disclosure agreement to help you vet some draft rules coming out of the committee, a lot of people took that as an insult. And I'm not allowed to sign non-disclosure agreements that prevent me from telling the people I work for, who are your partner fellow regulators, from things that they need to know and they need to be available of. And if you want that kind of input, and I'm particularly upset that somebody associated with HISA, because there were some commissions who were not approached to sign the NDAs. And I basically told when the executive committee decided we weren't going to sign an NDA, that did reach out and try to get access to this. And they were told that the reason why they couldn't have access to it or didn't have access to it because I didn't sign an NDA. And I got to tell you, I'm a little PO'd about that. You know, some commissions were invited to sign an NDA and some commissions were not. But I told commissions that wanted to do it and were willing to sign an NDA to reach out directly to HISA. And some of them got responses and some of them didn't. So I don't know how you're running inside the shop there, but you know, you're making some very minor operational mistakes that are like creating landmines here.
Well, I'll take responsibility for the NDA problem. I mean, while we had an NDA, I haven't been involved in the execution, but just to let you know, I'll take 100% of the blame for that. We have lots of lawyers in the middle of having lawsuits against them wouldn't let anything go out. Yeah. We had to have those NDAs because while we're in these early stages, we did not want somebody cherry picking language and then cramming it down our throat without any context. So the reality is, if you're angry about that, just be angry at me.
No, John, we're just that, you know, we're in this boat with you.
Right, okay? I got you. But you can kind of see my perspective with the lawsuit.
And you've heard it from a number of people. We're all sitting here we're all sitting here, and you got a lot of people in the boat who would like to be rowing in the same direction so that this thing doesn't come crashing and burning down and the industry doesn't end up wearing it in a really negative way. And we're not sure.
We still got a month. We still got a month to row the boat together.
No, I know. We got more than a month. We got more than a month.
I'm talking about to the FTC deadline, and we're committed to rowing the boat with you. Just lay those comments on us so Dr. Stover and her committee and Ann can get to work on them. And anything I get, any questions you have in terms of the legalese or the words, call me or email me. I will make time to talk to any of you. We want to get this right, and we want your comments, period.
Great, John. I'm going to go to Steve May, who had his hand up. Steve, you're on.
Yeah, so I keep hearing about how much uncertainty there is. You know, we haven't got this done, haven't got that done. Can we at least get some, because I have to start planning financially for this. Can we at least get some kind of a statement on how much money you guys have spent so far? I mean, if I have to do open record request, I'm willing to send that or whatever, but I mean, is this $1 million? Is it 2 million? I'm just, because we all have to pay that. You know, you guys get to run up all the bills you want, and we have to pay for that as part of the statute. So can we at least get a statement, or who would I direct that request to get a statement on how much has been spent so far on this, so that we can begin to kind of put that into some of our financial planning on this? Because we don't have any choice on that either. So how would we get that information?
Well, Steve, what I would tell you is you're going to get that information, because part of the process set forth in the statutes and the regs is that we have to follow a budget process, and then we do the assessments and all those type of things. And we're just, as I was explaining in response to, I think, the individual from Washington, we are still in the midst of that. And that
doesn't change how much has been spent. That's what I'm asking, just how much has been spent, because that doesn't have any effect on what goes in the future.
I don't know, but I would tell you, as I've indicated, and I know it's frustrating, as I indicated from the individual from Oklahoma, we are talking and trying to figure, we are aware of the state budget cycles. We are aware of kind of these positions you're in, and we're trying to come up with some kind of creative ways to not blindside anybody. But right now, we are under this mad dash to get to this December 6th deadline. So I think it's reasonable for me to tell you that we're not going to, almost all our resources are going to be on safety and on the anti-doping, focusing on working with comments from constituent groups from you all to get the regulations drafted to December 6th. Once we hit that deadline, we'll be turning our attention to the next deadline, which involves the operationals and the money.
How much loans have been taken out so far to fund this then? Because this is all funded by loans from what I understand. Who would I find out? Who would I address that question to then? Someone has to be in charge of the money on that. Who has spent that money so far?
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine the lion's share of that money's been spent in the litigation, quite frankly.
Yeah, Steve, I don't think you're going to get those numbers anytime soon. So you just have to wait.
Is your group subject to an open records request, so we could get that now?
Yeah. Charlie, Chairman Shearler at our July board meeting indicated that HISA was not subject to open records or public meetings requirements. I think as a regulatory agency, that might be a mistake going forward. The industry is used to their regulators being subject to such things, things being done in a very open and transparent way, even though RCI is under no responsibility to do open meetings. I mean, our model rules meetings are open. Most of our committee meetings are open.
Steve, excuse me, I like to go back to the statute to answer questions when Congress has already told us what the answer is. So the statute says that by April 1st, or 90 days before the effective date, the authority is required to provide each state racing commission with its budget and its proportionate share. And in many of the calls with the state racing commissions, I believe Hank has committed to provide those numbers much earlier than that, perhaps as early as the end of the year. We understand the budget cycles of the states, and that may not be, timely for the current budget cycle, but that's what the statute requires, and the HISA can't provide a budget to it that to you all that hasn't been approved by the board yet. And
I'm
they're
just
working.
asking how much loans have been taken out. Was there 5 million in loans? Were there 15 million? That should be a question that should be at anybody's fingertips on that. I mean, that's something that doesn't require any future planning. That I'm just curious how much loans have been taken out just to fund this so far. I mean, you talk about all these attorneys that have been involved with this. There's a lot of talented people that I know don't come cheap. I'm just curious how much has been spent so far, not about the future budget or anything like that. I'm just talking and the implementation costs and all that. I'm just looking for how much has actually been spent, or at least how much money in loans have been taken out, at least. I think that's a pretty reasonable question to ask for something that we have to pay for at the end.
I have no idea.
So we're gonna have to move on because we're not gonna know this, and I think it would be, you know, I will say this, Steve. I mean, RCI has offered to provide certain services. We actually offered free office space. We actually offered an infrastructure. We offered our staff, and HISA chose to go in different directions. But you know, running committee meetings and stuff like that, we do that all the time. And you know, websites and doing online comments. I mean, you know, we've got that infrastructure's already built, but they chose to basically rebuild some of that stuff. Let's go to Idaho. Trina, you've been patiently waiting. You're on.
Thank you, Ed. I just would like to thank you guys for allowing us to be a part of these meetings so that we can get some information. I fully understand that right now with our state not sending a signal out, that we're not going to have to follow under these regulations at this time, although we did have a track send signal out in 2020. One concern that I have, being probably one of these smallest jurisdictions that have been in this meeting, I'm concerned that HISA doesn't fully grasp the full extent of the extreme differences in economics between jurisdictions. Our state has operated without an executive director for numerous years. Many of us fill multiple roles out at the tracks. A very good example, I'm the racing superintendent for the Eastern Idaho State Fair. I am my main secretary, my own horseman's bookkeeper. I jump on the horse ambulance. I do my marketing. My office is open from 6 a.m. until midnight. We assist horsemen with unloading, feed, anything they need. Our base purse for a maiden race is $1,600. I am concerned about trying to rebuild. Oh, and also I jumped into being licensing for the State Racing Commission because we didn't have anyone to fill that role at our tracks down here on I-15. So I asked, number one, that HISA be mindful of the diversity in economics, how many passionate people we have, not only doing multiple roles, but volunteering to even make it happen. We want to build our state. That's why we're still in it. And so I definitely want some answers on how are we going to pull this off? If I don't even have enough money to get a race to $4,000 as a minimum as my neighbor states that are in bad economics, how can I achieve being able to adhere to this federal law?
Okay, I don't think there's an easy answer for that, Tina.
I'll say two quick things. Tina, I think at least what I heard from Ann and Dr. Stover about in terms of coming up with a process that might take some time, it's not punitive. I would also tell you, it might not make you feel any better. We are so aware of the uniqueness of each state that I literally, while the time you were talking, pulled up a document and can tell you how many race days you had in Idaho, how much was wagered, and what your purses are and what your unique starters were. Again, we're using that information to try to impact the budget issues so that we make sure that it is as little as punitive against a state like Idaho as possible. We are, and again, I can't guarantee you're going to be happy with anything we do. I can only guarantee you that we've got all the data to try to do everything we can so we can understand the uniqueness of the difference between what's going on in Idaho versus West Virginia versus Oklahoma versus Kentucky versus Florida. And the board and the committees are well aware of those challenges.
I understand that you can look up the stats on the computer and they may or may not be current. I run more thoroughbred races at Blackfoot, even though we only run 4 days, than all the other tracks in Idaho combined. And being able to look up the stats doesn't truly reflect having the on the grounds experience. Will HISA be coming out to tracks and getting direct feedback and getting direct experience of what we do out here to make it happen? Because we're not doing it for a paycheck.
I think the point's made. I think Trina, this is going to play out. They're first of all, HISA doesn't have actually a permanent staff yet. They've got interim staff that's working on just trying to get this thing launched. And I think Idaho is, you're not going to be necessarily affected next July 1st, but I understand and I absolutely appreciate. I will tell you this, that when they were the nominating committee, I had a discussion with the co-chair of the nominating committee in early February, and I urged them, I urged her in terms of assessing who should go on the board or who should go on the committees, to be very cognizant of the fact that the racing industry is a lot bigger than the major jurisdictions and the big tracks, and to be very cognizant, there's a very real concern about the economic impact on smaller and mid-sized racing venues and entire, industries in various states that are affected by that. I also urged her not to be thoroughbred centric, because there was a pretty good chance that over time the other breeds would probably get folded in. And you need people who had some experience with that level of racing. I will say this, and it's not a criticism of any individual who ended up ultimately getting selected. We were asked by the Jockey Club to provide some names, suggestions for board members, and we did, and not one of the people that we suggested was interviewed. So maybe when we suggested them, that was the kiss of death. But I will say this, is that the advice that we gave was roundly ignored. And that's unfortunate, because I mean, there's a lot of talent on that board. And I really think Chairman Schiller is a, and he's new to horse racing, but I know he's very sensitive to some of the issues, at least the discussions I've had with him early on this. It still befuddles me as to why we've collectively been kind of kept at arm's length on some of this stuff, but that's okay. They're trying to get an awful lot done in a short period of time. But certainly the state by state implementation calls we've been having have been, I think, an eye opener for some of the people who work for the HISA. To understand the very practical limitations that occur at state racing commissions, and in many respects, the resource issues and the that every state racing commission has had over the years. We can only do the job with the money. You can only drive a car as far as you have fuel in the tank. Nobody's been ever given a blank check. HISA actually has self-taxing authority. So in one respect, they have a blank check. But with that blank check comes an awesome responsibility not to kill an industry. And I think, I can't speak for the various commissioners, but I think that they are sensitive to that. Only time will tell by virtue of what actually comes out of the HISA board. So I think there's a lot that remains to be seen. So we'll see what happens. I got to go to Tony Solano in Pennsylvania. Tony, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. And I just have one question. Has HISA and USADA come to an agreement yet on USADA being the enforcement arm of this? Or I'm assuming by the stuff that was sent out yesterday where USADA put the drug regs together that they are, but can you guys answer that question?
Sure. That's an easy question to answer because Travis did a 40-minute interview with TDN yesterday, which I watched the whole thing, and I think that I would encourage any of you all, it's that TDN writer's room, but Dr. Tessa Muir and Travis, the agreement has not been entered into yet, Tony. And Travis talks about basically, it's his full expectation that there's going to be an agreement. But at least according to Travis on his interview, he made clear that, obviously they're still willing to listen and make changes, but they want to make sure that the FTC doesn't, do the program in such a way that Travis would not believe it was consistent with, SADA's views. So we're still working through all that. But if you listen to his TD interview, I think you'll, there are about 10 or 15 little nuggets on there that I found very interesting. So we met twice last week with Travis and his team negotiating the contract, and we've made a tremendous amount of progress, but we don't have it yet.
Okay, is there a plan B just in case USADA doesn't go along, or is that getting ahead of ourselves?
I think we have to cross plan B when we get there. Quite frankly, that'd be a whole different fire hose. That'd probably be like Niagara Falls falling down on you. But I do think I actually think if you listen to that 4 minutes, I think it might not make you feel great, but I think you'll feel marginally better. At least I thought he had some things to say that if I were in the shoes that I previously were in, I would have felt a lot better about. So if you like when you're driving or something, that if you got 40 extra minutes, I'd listen to it. They asked him some pretty tough questions, I thought.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else for the good of the order?
Tom, I'd like to suggest maybe if you really are thinking about including these other breeds, whoever your committee is, you might want to tell them that it's going to be not in the best interest of the health and welfare of a quarter horse to get him to work 5/8 of a mile in 103, which your rules that you sent out, proposed ones do. Obviously, they never intended to have quarter horses in them.
Yeah. I know the rules for workouts are different for quarter horses coming back.
Well, they don't go 5/8. I don't think it'd be healthy for them to.
Right.
That's elementary.
Yep.
I'd like to thank Dr. Stover and Tom and John and Ann and anybody else who's on here from HISA. These are sparky conversations sometimes, but understand, you've now got the same responsibility that each person on this call already has had and still has in many respects. What you're trying to achieve is what we're trying to achieve. And yes, we do get frustrated from time to time, and we're very concerned, even though the state's the financial burden, I started this out saying the state racing commissions are not part of the racing industry, and they're really not. But they care about the racing industry, and they're concerned about the viability of the racing industry in individual communities. And I think hopefully that whatever comes out with the authority that the federal government, Congress has given to HISA, that they understand that there's a real balance here. And I will say this, and it's come up by the lawyers. Tom has quoted the statute and what the intent of Congress is. As somebody who worked in the U.S. Senate for about 10 years of my life. I'll tell you right now, most members of Congress do not fully appreciate the intent or the impact of what this bill will do. And I think a mismanagement of this, and I said this to Chairman Sheeler very early on, that the politics of this can change dramatically by virtue of how it is implemented. You're talking about congressmen and senators who voted for this as part of a must-pass COVID piece of legislation. This particular law was not the subject of a hearing. Normally, when they mark up a piece of federal legislation in committee, everybody gets at the table to figure out how it's going to work. That really didn't happen here. This was a slam dunk. So I think what's happening is people who are upset, and I'm not talking state racing commission people, I'm talking about people in the industry. If they feel that their economic viability is threatened in any way, then they will they'll go complain to their congressman, and they'll complain to their senators, and you know, to the extent that a local racing venue has to close or may not be able to survive because of whatever reason, you know, this sport is challenged already. And the HISA board's been given a very delicate, careful responsibility to make it safer for our horses, to create uniformity, to combat those who will cheat. But in doing that, there's a real balance. And we're hoping to be able to basically work this together. And we just hopefully, you know, I have faith in a lot of the people that I know that are on the HISA board, and I'm sure Dr. Stover, I'm sure you've been pulling your hair out every now and then to say, what did I get myself into? But it's quite a responsibility, and there's a lot in the weeds. And our primary collective concern is we just don't want this to turn into a mess. And there are days we wake up and we fear that it might. And there are days I wake up and I say, you know, this is doable. So I kind of share what Mark said, is we've got to figure out how to make this work, but we don't really have a vote. The state racing commissions don't have a vote, but we do have a voice. And I think that's what this call was kind of about. But I want to thank everybody for being part of it. And we've gone on almost, we're pushing on 2 hours. And I just ask everybody, I'll get a hold of the document and try to circulate it. That's currently up that's been modified. That's up on the HISA website. I'm encouraged by some of the things that John Roach said. I was encouraged, as I put in an email to the members in a conversation I had with Tom the other day, that the HISA board was very sensitive, and the HISA attorneys were very sensitive to what HISA can and cannot do in forcing a state to do X, Y, and Z. I use the example of sanctuary cities. You know, there are cities that for some reason don't agree with the federal immigration laws and policies, and they have chosen not to enforce those and left it totally to the federal government. Sometimes there's a memorandum of understanding between agencies as to how things will work. I think that's kind of what John's talking about, an agreement between HISA and a state racing commission on certain things. This will not play out the same in every state, but what the next phase is going to be, once these rules go to the FTC, HISA's got to figure out what the cost is. And it's kind of, just think of three people standing looking at each other, you know, the State Racing Commission, USADA, and then HISA. So HISA can't determine its budget till it knows what the costs of USADA are. USADA doesn't know what its costs are till it knows whether the state racing commissions are going to continue to do X, Y, and Z. Meanwhile, as Tom has continued to lose what little hair he has on his head coming from the various state implementation calls, so somebody's got to kind of give an answer, and we're going to have to figure out as best we can what this thing is going to cost and who can do what and who will do what. And then outside of the state racing commissions, you've got people in governor's offices, the budget division saying, well, what's in it for us? Are we getting any money? And nobody can answer that because there's no federal money attached to this. The federal government gives the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, I think, $9 million a year for what they do in the Olympics. But there wasn't a dime put into the horse racing industry or even asked for by the people who advocated for this legislation. So it is what it is, and we've got a little bit of a quagmire on our hands, and we're all going to keep talking and figure a way through it. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say, but thank you all for being on this. We'll do one on medication rules on Tuesday. That may not be it might be more sparky than this. I don't think it'll be as sparky as this, but thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Anytime. Bye-bye.